Can I begin now?
Yes, you can, sir.
Good morning. My name is Mark Horson. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Weinstein. Following his graduation from Trinity College and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Weinstein, David to me, did a residency, chief residency, and fellowship in pediatric endocrinology at Children's Hospital in Boston. And oh, that's where I met David. We did our specialty training around the same time, both at Children's Hospital, he in endocrinology, me in biochemical genetics. David subsequently obtained a master's in clinical investigation from Harvard and MIT and became director of the Glycogen Storage Disease, or GSD program at Boston Children's. In 2005, David moved to the University of Florida, where he directed the GSD program and became a professor. He and his team then moved to the University of Connecticut and Connecticut Children's Medical Center in 2017, where he was a tenured professor. David follows the largest cohort of hepatic GSD patients in the world, with over 700 patients at his center traveling from 51 countries. In 1989, he was named as one of the inaugural Goldwater Scholars. He is a former Jan Albrecht Award winner from the American Association for the Study of Liver Diseases, and he was the George Sacher Award winner from the Gerontological Society of America. In 2013, David was honored with the Order of the Smile, International Humanitarian Award, and he's a member of the Rare Disease Research Hall of Fame. He has authored over 100 manuscripts on glycogen storage disease, along with 28 chapters on the liver forms of GSD. Dr. Weinstein will be talking about medical advocacy for clinical trials. Thank you, David. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. That's a nice surprise. I did not know you were going to do my introduction, and I'm thrilled. It's a real honor to have you do it. Thank you so much for the kind words. Just a little note. I have left academic medicine, and I am now serving as the Vice President of Clinical Development at Passage Bio. Just to add on, when I spoke to Julie about coming here, I was doing glycogen storage disease, but COVID has caused challenges beyond what anybody could have expected. Rare diseases get affected by this, and one of the challenges was that my patients, as you heard from Mark, traveled from all over to seek their care, which is common in the rare disease community. And unfortunately, when patients couldn't travel, that meant the hospitals weren't getting money, and that meant the support dried up. And unfortunately, we had no choice but to close our program. I still wanted to do this, even though I'm now involved in industry, and I'm still involved with rare disease work. I will be focusing now on bringing gene therapy to another rare disorder, GM1 gangliosidosis, and also working on gene therapy for Krabbe disease. So I'm thrilled to be here. I also want to thank Julie for those kind, unifying words, which we really all need at this point. These have been challenging times, but anytime I think of my obstacles, I think about what you guys have to deal with every day, and my problems are minor. So I will be talking to you over the next 30 minutes or so about participating in research, what you need to know. Now, research has been a big part of my life. I started having a lab research position at Mass General. I had my own lab there doing Alzheimer's research, and I decided that I wasn't happy and that I wanted to focus on pediatrics, and I was reincarnated as a pediatric endocrinologist. My first glycogen storage disease patient was 1994. And then in 1998, I was invited to speak at the National Conference for Glycogen Storage Disease. I asked the organizers, why are you inviting me? I only have 3 patients with glycogen storage disease. And they said to me that with 3 patients, that made me an expert. And that tells you about what the rare disease community is, has to struggle with. They also said they had no speakers for the conference, so they would love for me to come. I went to the conference with no real interest in glycogen storage disease. I will put that confession out there. I went there because it was a free trip, and to Seattle, which I had never visited. But I was shocked by what I saw. What I saw at that conference was a meeting that began with a moment of silence, and they read the names of all the children who died that year from glycogen storage disease in the US. The conference had no new research being presented. The research that was being presented was 16 years old. And the whole conference was devoted to liver transplantation and how wonderful liver transplantation was. But if your only hope is a liver transplant in a 1 or 2 year old, that's not very good. What struck me though was that the fact that there was no research. And if there's no research, it was never going to get better. And at that conference, I decided that somebody had to care about these children. And I went back to Boston Children's, grew the program, and for the last 22 years, focused exclusively on this disorder, seeing nothing else. So nobody goes into research thinking that their research project is going to fail. But research is really testing a hypothesis or question. If we knew something was going to work, we wouldn't have to do the studies. It's the hunt for the truth. And one point I want to come across today is that nobody goes into research assuming that it's not going to work, but there's no guarantee. And I want people to realize that research is really testing the questions and seeing what will work. So one very important point is that research is not always successful the first time, but it doesn't mean that useful information is not coming out of that. So let me give you an example. In 2002, I attended a meeting with families, and the families, we were working on gene therapy and we were working on new treatments that were coming up, and the families said to us, really what we would like to do is to be able to sleep through the night because people with glycogen storage disease required feeds every 4 hours. They said, if you could help create an extended release cornstarch, that would really change our lives, almost as dramatic as gene therapy, because we would finally be able to sleep and we'd be able to go to sleep at night, not worrying if our child was going to be alive in the morning. So a team was put together and we started to work on this project. We went to the companies to work with us and we thought, okay, we found a great product. And we had people who said to us, it's a food, you can go ahead and just do it in people. But no, we wanted to test it because until you do the studies, you don't know. So the first time we tried what the company said was going to be the miracle drug, it completely failed. We gave it to people and we found out that while it worked in animals, the people could not digest it. And as a result, their blood sugars fell even faster than they did before. The second product that we got worked and we got great results. The problem was it tasted so bad that the patients accused me of working for fear factor. It looked like somebody had a stomach virus. It was brown and horrible. And it tasted so bad that they said we would rather wake up every 4 hours than have to take this product. And if you can't get people to take it, it's no good. But finally, on the third try, we found a product working with a company in England, VitaFlow, and that product allowed people to sleep for 8 hours, and that ultimately was released as a medical product that is being used today. And so, yes, we had some failures along the way, but ultimately the product was able to make it. And when research succeeds, there's nothing better. So as I mentioned, in 1998, we started working on gene therapy. And what I put up on the screen now is this picture from the very first time that we did gene therapy in a patient with glycogen storage disease, which was July 2018. And I'm pleased to say that not only has it been successful, but people with glycogen storage disease who were dependent upon feeds every 3 to 4 hours are completely off treatment now and doing well. And that's a dream to see that happen. And it shows the power of gene therapy, and that is why research is being done. Now, what I would like to do is at the beginning, give you the messages that are critical for you to remember. The most important message I want you to remember today is that research is always voluntary. you as a parent or you as a person who has the disease always has control. And you should remember that you should never be forced into anything. As a research participant, you have rights, and we're going to talk about some of these things throughout this talk. I encourage everybody to do your homework. Again, nobody goes into research with the intention of failing or the intention of doing harm, but there's lots of studies going on. Everybody's trying to find a treatment for the children and for the adults. And do your homework to find out which trial you want to be in. And again, we will talk about this. Please do not be afraid to ask questions. Actually, I encourage you, anytime you're doing a study, to talk to the investigator, talk to the team, make sure all your questions are answered. Ask questions about the risks. Don't assume everything's about the benefits. Ask about the risks, because consideration of the risks is just as important as consideration of the benefits. Please make sure you ask questions about what is involved in this study. It's critical for you to know what is being requested, because sometimes what's being requested is just so involved that it's not worth it. And again, you should never be pressured to do anything. Everything that is done in a study is voluntary. Now, there are all different types of research studies. In rare diseases, oftentimes it starts with case reports or case series where a doctor sees a patient and reports on it as a single case. The problem is oftentimes that you don't know if that's real or not. You don't know what other factors were involved. And so we need more studies. There are natural history protocols, which we will talk about. There are retrospective studies where people look back on the experience in a rare disease to gather information. There are prospective studies where you join a study and the information is collected going forward. And then ultimately, the best golden study is a randomized double-blinded clinical study, which means that a patient is treated against a placebo and neither the doctor or the patient knows what's going on. The problem is, while that's the golden standard for most research, that rarely happens in rare disease because we don't have the luxury of having large studies, and we don't really want to expose people with a rare disease with a small population to placebos. So we are going to focus on some of these over the next few minutes, just so people understand what's involved with each type of research. Now, there are three types of research particularly common in rare diseases. The first type is epidemiology research. The second type is natural history research. And the third type is clinical trials. So let me talk a little bit about epidemiology research. Epidemiology research is testing the incidence, distribution, or determinants of health and disease in a defined population. So let me give you some examples. These are all studies that we did where we tested the frequency of glycogen storage disease type 1A in the Jewish population. We were approached about this because back in 1998, people didn't know which populations had the disease. And we were contacted because a group organization thought that this was more common in the Jewish population. It is. 1 in 72 people was a carrier. And what we did is we screened 30,000 people to get the frequency in the population. I also had a research institute on the Faroe Islands, which are halfway between Iceland and Norway. And we knew that type 3 glycogen storage disease was more common there. We just didn't know how frequent it was. You know, in the United States, it's close to about 1 in a million people, but on the islands, 1 in 22 people is a carrier. And then we were approached by the FDA, and they wanted to know what percentage of people with glycogen storage disease had antibodies against the virus that we were going to use for gene therapy. So these are important studies. It helps define what the risk is for people and who needs it. When you're approached for epidemiology research, these are some of the questions that you should consider. Will personal information be connected with me? So sometimes when you join a study like this, the information is shared with you. Are you a carrier for the disease, or have you had antibodies against the virus that's going to be used for gene therapy? And other times we are not allowed to share the information because the testing is being done in a research lab or because the FDA says that you can't share it. But you should know that before you agree to participate. Will the results be given to my doctors? Sometimes results can go to your doctors. Well, sometimes it can come to you. Who else will receive the results? Will it go in my medical record? Will my insurance get it? This is particularly important right now where pre-existing conditions potentially in the future may be used against you. And you don't want your insurance company to get access to research information that may come back to hurt you. And could the testing reveal other results? This is very important because sometimes you do studies like whole exome and whole genome studies, which I think are going to be discussed later. And you're looking to find one disease, but you find something else. And is that information going to come back to me? Or what's going to happen to that? The other thing that you have to always consider in epidemiology research is there the potential of exposing paternity issues that are unwanted? This may sound like a joke, but in one of my studies, we had this happen quite often, and I'm glad that this was defined in advance, but please make sure you know what you're getting into. Natural history protocols are very important in rare diseases. So one of the problems is we don't have the luxury of doing large studies. And we need to define, how do patients do with a particular rare disease without treatment, or how do they do with standard of care? This is critical because when you do studies, we don't want to do placebo controls. And the FDA has allowed us to use historical information for rare diseases to compare the benefits of treatment. In a natural history protocol, it can be everything from looking backwards to see how people have done, or prospective, where information is collected moving forward. Again, when you are approached for natural history protocol, please find out what's involved. Sometimes nothing is involved except giving you permission for the information to be used. Other times it involves getting lots of procedures done. And I have been involved with natural history protocols that were like that. One of them just did nothing but just gather the clinical information. The other one required spinal taps, lumbar punctures, MRIs, anesthesia, and there was no potential benefit for the patient. It was just gathering information. And before you expose yourself or your child to a protocol, you need to understand what is being asked of me. Another key question is, if you enroll in a natural history protocol, will you be prohibited from participating in other clinical trials? Usually you can participate in a natural history protocol and then drop out when another trial starts. But please define that in advance so that nobody is caught off guard. I know that in GM1, the disease I'm working on now, we have a natural history protocol, but we allow people, as soon as the gene therapy starts, to drop out of the natural history protocol and go into the gene therapy. Will anything be charged to my insurance? Just because something is research doesn't mean it doesn't get charged. So if the natural history protocol is deemed standard of care, there may be charges to your insurance company, there may be co-pays. So please make sure you understand what is being paid for by the study and what is being charged to your insurance. So again, you're not caught off guard, and what compensation is being offered for participation. Clinical trials ultimately are what lead to change. Clinical trials test new interventions, but they are not clinical care. Again, nobody goes into it assuming the trial is going to fail, but many trials do not succeed. And so it is critical to look at the clinical trials carefully, because these trials are really being done to find out if interventions are safe and efficacious. It's not a guarantee. So let me go into the different phases of the clinical trial, because when you are approached for a trial, when you're considering a trial, I want you to consider what phase and where we are in the trial. The first part of any clinical trial is called a phase 1. And that is where a small number of patients are exposed to a treatment. And the only goal of phase 1 is to assess safety. You want to know if, when we do this, is a drug tolerated in people? A phase 2 is a study where the population's expanded It's still looking at safety, but now different doses are being tested to try to find out which is the best dose to do and the balance between efficacy and safety. A phase 3 is the larger study, is the large study that's really being done for efficacy. And that's what the FDA uses to determine, is this going to become a drug? And a phase 4 study is after something's become a drug, and a drug is continued to be followed after approval to ensure safety in a larger population. Now, in rare diseases, we do not go through all these different phases. So you will hear the term phase 1, 2. And that's because in a rare disease, we don't have the luxury of large populations to do these studies. The other reason is by combining the phase 1 and the phase 2, it's much faster and allows rare disease research to progress at a much faster pace than, say, a high blood pressure medicine. A phase 1, 2 is typically 5 to 15 people in a rare disease. Again, the goal is assessing safety, but it's also being used to find the right dose. The phase 3 trials in rare disease are often, they are much smaller than in the other diseases. They're about 20 to 100 patients, sometimes even smaller. They may or may not have a placebo, unlike the, again, high blood pressure medicines that would always have a placebo or standard of care treatment. In rare diseases, we oftentimes don't. Now, one reason I wanted you to know what it is first of all, to understand what is being done, and also to realize that the success rate depends on where you are in the trial. A phase 1 trial is a safety trial. Most people do very well with it. The trial progresses from a phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 2 trial is where it's being tried for efficacy really for the first time, and not all trials succeed. And so if you're in a phase 2, it seems great to get into a study early, but the chances of success are lower than when you get to a phase 3, which is the final study. And a phase 3 trial, while it's later on in the process, has a higher rate of success. So there are many reasons why people participate in a clinical trial, and there are reasons why people don't participate. People participate because they want to advance medicine. They're hoping to improve the condition. They're hoping to improve themselves. They're hoping to improve the lives of others. It also is a way to get free medical care, because sometimes that's included in some of these trials. I want to emphasize that money should never be the driving force for participating in research. There are reasons people don't participate. They're concerned about the risks. They're fearful of being the first or one of the first people in a trial. The trial requires too many procedures. It's too demanding of time. There's a lack of knowledge about what's being involved, or people don't even know about the studies. And so another issue is people don't know how to enroll in studies, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But I want to say that it is okay if you don't feel comfortable participating in a study, you can wait. Now, these are questions that I want everybody to consider before entering a trial. What experience has occurred to date? What are the potential benefits, but also what are the potential risks for participating? What will be required as part of the study? Will there be a placebo group? Make sure you know that, because you don't want maybe to go into a study and find out that you or your child got a placebo. How many doses are being tested? Is it a low dose, only one dose? Is it low, medium, high? Understand where you are in the trial. Will the results be shared with you? Sometimes the results are not shared with you, and that's frustrating for many parents. Who will cover the expenses? You would think typically in research that all the expenses are covered, but that's not always the case. There are many studies where, especially for international patients, travel's not covered, housing's not covered, and you don't want to join a study and find out that you've just added lots of expenses to your budget. What is the time commitment? Will my insurance be charged for anything? Is there a stipend? And will the treatment be available to me or my child after the trial? To me, this is a very important question, especially for something that's an ongoing treatment. There's nothing more frustrating for parents or for someone in a trial to find out that they have a drug that's working for their disease, and then the trial ends and the company walks away and says goodbye. And before you join a study that's going to be an ongoing treatment, please find out if you're going to have access to the treatment afterward if it works. Okay, so what about volunteering for a trial? The first thing is that not all volunteers qualify. There's something called inclusion criteria, and these are conditions that must be met in order to participate. Things like age, the confirmation of the diagnosis. There are exclusion criteria, which are conditions, if they are present, will keep people out of the trial. The inclusion and exclusion criteria are usually very strict, and it's very difficult to get an exemption. So you may want to participate in the study, but if you do not meet those criteria, unfortunately, there's nothing the doctor or the team can do. And I just put on this slide examples of studies that were done for our recent study in terms of inclusion and exclusion criteria for the gene therapy trial. And if somebody failed any of these, then there was nothing I could do, even if I wanted to treat the patient. Another important step in clinical research is the informed consent process. The goal of an informed consent is to help you understand what is required. Now, the documents have become unbearable. Our consent form for gene therapy was 28 pages. It used to be 2 pages when I started in my career, but it gets more and more detailed with time. I ask everybody, even though these are horrible documents to read, to please review the document carefully, focus on the schedule of events, which is a summary of what is required, review what will occur at each visit and what procedures are being done. Please discuss the document with your team and ask questions. Another important point is what happens if you join the study and then you want to drop out? What will happen afterward? Will you be followed for safety? What will happen to care? You need to understand, because once you go in, it needs to be clear what's going to happen. I want to emphasize that an informed consent is not a contract. Even though you sign it and it's witnessed, it is not a contract. Even after you sign an informed consent, all research is voluntary. And you may always drop out of a study if you are not comfortable about what is occurring. You should never feel pressure to do something that you don't want to do or that makes you uncomfortable. And you should have the ability to discuss any concerns with your team. If you don't want to do procedures, you may be able to find a way to continue in a protocol, but say not get the spinal tap, because at that point you're not comfortable with it. So remember that as a research participant, you are the boss. I want to end by just talking about how you can find out about research. There is a website called clinicaltrials.gov. It was created by the government, and all research studies in this country have to be included in it. Please look at that, because it is constantly being updated, and you can search for the rare disease that you are interested in. Please talk to your medical team when you go in for visits about research opportunities. Talk to your advocacy groups. Rare New England and some of the other groups out there are great resources to know what is going on and what is coming along the pipeline. And the family conferences, people talk, and you guys can be your best advocates. So this is the clinicaltrials.gov website. Again, please, everybody should write this down, and I encourage everybody to look at this. So I typed in the glycogen storage disease, which was the disease I cared for, and it shows you every study that occurred in the past. Since the website was on, it talked about what's active and what's recruiting. And then if you click on it, it gives you more information. So let me end again with the key messages I hope you got out of this. Research is always voluntary. You have rights. Please do your homework. Look at the trials carefully. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Thank you very much. I just want to end by highlighting that research is a team effort. It's not a one-person effort, and it's done by the scientists, doctors, nurses, and the patients are part of that team. And we could not do it with all of these parts. And I want to thank my team. Even though I'm not practicing, they were my family for the last 30 years. And They helped me live a dream of going from a petri dish to human trials with gene therapy. And I'm very fortunate to have it. And I want to thank Rare New England for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, David. 30 years, huh? You're not just dating yourself, you're dating me.
Yeah, somehow we got older.
That was a superb talk, a really good summary. Your professional journey has taken you from seeing the most intrusive of therapies, where you're intervening in a patient's life every 4 hours to do something else to keep them stable, to all the way to gene therapy, which is pretty much a cure. Just some questions from the audience. Are there resources you know of for patients and their families to afford trials that might have costs associated with them, but the trials might greatly benefit them?
So on most of the trials, all expenses will be covered. But if there's not, I would talk to the family organizations. Oftentimes they might be able to assist, because the family organizations are dedicated to to making sure the research moves forward. I know that for our gene therapy trial, international patients could be sponsored by their organization in their country. So I think that's oftentimes the best way. Mark, do you have any suggestions for other resources?
No, patient advocacy organizations might know of this, but this actually related to another question. Are there, like, this summary was terrific, but the people who listened this morning might not be in a situation right now where they're considering a research study, but a year down the road, they might be, and then they want to hear the talk again. Is there a site which can guide them through it again? Of course, this will be on the RNE website, this presentation, so that's good. Do you know of any sites that sort of guide patients through this? And that site might post opportunities for funding.
Yeah, so I don't know. Unfortunately, I inherited the same disease as Julie, and I'm technology challenged. But if anybody wants to post this, so it's available for other people, whether it's on this website or any other place, please feel free to use this. This is for the patients. And, I don't know other great resources. The only way really I know to get this information in the future is to continue to personally and go to clinicaltrials.gov and look up your disease and find out what's going on.
Okay, thank you. And last question. So if you participate in a natural history study, it could potentially allow you not to participate in a different clinical trial. Is this something they're required to tell you, or something the patient needs to ask?
They should tell you, but I feel like it's critical always to do your homework, because you don't want to enter a study, whether it's natural history study or even another clinical trial, only to find out that you were not eligible for something down the line. So it's really important to ask those questions. I know that I have been involved with studies that if somebody participated in a drug trial, then they were not eligible for the gene therapy. And that's not something you want to find out after the fact. So please, they should always tell you. I don't believe that people are trying to deceive you, but sometimes it doesn't hurt to ask, and always be careful.
Thank you, David. All right, folks, that concludes this session. This presentation will be posted at some point after the conference, if you want to use it as a resource. Thank you.